Have you ever felt someone give you a level of intensity so strong it felt almost unreal, and then suddenly become distant, like it meant nothing? What you felt was not fake, but it was not what you think either. That intensity was never a promise. It was a release, because what you are dealing with is not someone who feels less. It is someone who feels deeply, but has learned to hide it, control it, and keep it locked inside. And when that pressure finally finds a way out, it does not come out in small ways. It comes out all at once, in a space that feels safe enough for them to handle. And for many avoidants, that space is physical closeness. When you begin to understand avoidance, you have to start with a simple but often missed truth.
Emotional suppression does not remove feeling. It actually makes it stronger. It compresses it, holds it inside, and whatever is held under pressure will sooner or later find a way out. The mistake many people make is thinking that because an avoidant looks calm, distant, or even uninterested on the outside, there is nothing happening within them. In truth, the opposite is happening. Avoidants are not people who feel less. They are people who have learned, often very early in life, that showing emotion is unsafe, useless, or even risky. So they build a kind of inner control. They regulate, they contain, they manage everything inside. Over time, this pattern becomes who they are. They appear self-reliant, steady, and in control. But that control comes with a hidden cost, because emotions that are not worked through do not simply disappear. They stay. They build up quietly over time. And what is stored does not stay silent forever. It looks for release. It looks for an opening, a place where it can finally come out without setting off the same fear of being exposed that the avoidant has spent years trying to escape.
And this is where things begin to shift in a way that most people do not expect. That stored emotional energy starts to look for a channel where it can move freely, but still feel safe and limited at the same time. For many avoidants, physical connection becomes that channel, because it has structure. It has a clear start, a middle, and an end. It exists inside a defined space where expectations, roles, and limits feel more certain. There is an unspoken understanding. We will be close, but only in this way, and only for this short moment. That makes it feel safer for them. It allows the avoidant to experience intensity without feeling like they are losing themselves or giving up control. So when they enter that space, all that stored energy, the desire, the passion, the longing, and even the softness they do not show in everyday life, can begin to flow outward. To the person experiencing this, it can feel powerful.
It can feel deeper than anything they have felt before. It does not feel like simple attraction. It feels like something real, something meaningful, something that has been building for a long time and is finally being released. And in many ways, that feeling is real. But here is the part that often gets misunderstood. That intensity is real, but it is not the same as emotional openness. It is not a signal that the avoidant is now ready to stay in that level of closeness outside of that moment. It is simply the one space where their inner guard drops for a short time, not because the fear has disappeared, but because it feels controlled. It feels limited. It feels like something they can step into and step out of without losing themselves. And this creates a strong illusion. The other person starts to believe that this is their true self, that this is how they can be all the time. It begins to feel like a promise of something deeper. But for the avoidant, it does not work that way. Once that moment ends, the same patterns return.
The same distance comes back. The same control shows up again. And now, the difference between those two states, the closeness and the withdrawal, becomes even more noticeable and confusing. This is why people often say avoidants are intense in these moments. What they are actually seeing is the release of stored emotional energy finding its way through the only path that feels safe enough to express it. It is not about trying to confuse or mislead anyone. It is about a pattern they have learned without even realizing it. They have separated where they feel from where they show. And if you do not understand this difference, it becomes easy to misunderstand what is happening. You begin to take intensity as a sign of something lasting, passion as a kind of promise, and moments as something more stable than they are meant to be. Because in the end, intensity without stability does not build connection. It creates uncertainty. It creates mixed signals.
It pulls someone closer while also pushing them away, and when you look deeper, you begin to see that this pattern is not random. It is a kind of strategy, not in a planned or harmful way, but in a deeply psychological sense. It is one of the few ways an avoidant can experience closeness without triggering the same level of fear that comes with emotional openness. And this difference changes everything in how they connect with others. For most people, vulnerability is emotional. It means being seen clearly, being understood, and being open about fears, needs, and insecurities. That kind of openness carries risk. It brings the chance of rejection, judgment, and loss. For someone with avoidant patterns, that risk feels too high. It feels like losing independence or control, so they protect themselves. They keep conversations light. They change the subject. They step back when things begin to feel too deep. But physical connection works in a different way.
It allows closeness without requiring full emotional exposure. It is a form of vulnerability that exists in the body rather than in words. It is immediate instead of long-lasting. In that moment, they are present, they are engaged, but they are not explaining themselves or revealing their full inner world. They are not opening parts of themselves that feel permanent or binding. It stays within a limited space, it has a clear end, and most importantly, it happens on their terms. That sense of control is essential, because for an avoidant, control equals safety. Without it, everything begins to feel uncertain and overwhelming. So what happens is this: they allow themselves to be fully present in that moment, sometimes even more present than people who are open in other parts of their lives. Their attention sharpens, their energy focuses, and to the other person, it can feel like something rare.
It can feel like this person is completely there, fully engaged, deeply connected in a way that is hard to explain. It feels like nothing is missing in that moment, and that is what makes it so powerful and at the same time so easy to misunderstand. And in that moment, they truly are present. But presence is not the same as openness, and this is where confusion starts to grow. The partner sees that presence and takes it as a sign of emotional closeness. They believe that if someone can be this connected in one space, then they must be able to be this connected everywhere. But the reality is different. The rules change depending on the space. The connection exists within a boundary, almost like a separate compartment. Intimacy is allowed there, but it does not naturally carry over into other parts of the relationship. And when that moment ends, so does the access to that level of closeness, leaving a gap that feels hard to understand.
Now the avoidant returns to their usual state, steady, controlled, and emotionally guarded. This does not mean the connection was not real or meaningful. It means that holding on to that level of openness outside a controlled space feels too overwhelming for them. It challenges their sense of independence and their inner balance. So they step back, often without fully knowing why. This creates a kind of emotional shock for the partner. One moment they are feeling closeness and intensity, something that feels almost like complete emotional merging. The next moment they are faced with distance, silence, or unclear behavior that does not match what they just experienced. Naturally, the partner tries to close that gap. They look for answers, for consistency, for something stable they can hold on to. But the more they move toward that clarity, the more the avoidant feels pressure building again. and that pressure leads them to withdraw even more.
Pause. This creates a strange situation. The place where the avoidant seems most open is actually the place that allows them to stay protected at the same time. It is a kind of closeness that still has limits built into it. It is connection with an exit already planned, and without understanding this, it becomes easy to misread what those intense moments really mean. You may start to translate physical closeness into emotional commitment. You may believe that what happens in those moments reflects a deeper readiness for a lasting connection. But in reality, it may simply be the only place where that level of connection feels manageable for them. This does not make the experience fake. It makes it specific. And once you see that clearly, something begins to change in how you respond. You stop chasing consistency in places where continuity was never meant to exist. You begin to notice the difference between someone who can reach connection in certain moments and someone who can hold onto it over time.
When you understand that difference, another layer becomes clear. The pattern of connection itself starts to stand out. With avoidance, connection rarely moves in a straight or stable way. Instead, it follows a cycle. It rises and falls, like a tide moving in and out. If you are not aware of this pattern, it can feel random and unpredictable. But underneath, it follows a very consistent rhythm. It often begins with distance. In that distance, the avoidant feels safe. There is space, there is freedom, and there is no pressure to meet emotional demands. And in that safety, something begins to shift inside them. Their natural desire slowly returns. They begin to feel curiosity again, attraction again, and sometimes even longing. For them, desire often needs space. It needs room to grow without feeling confined. So they move closer again. And when they do, it can feel sudden and intense.
They reach out, they engage more deeply, and that energy often shows itself most strongly through physical connection. The chemistry feels stronger, the attraction feels amplified, but what is really happening is a release of the tension that built up during the time apart. It is a reaction to the distance that came before it. As that closeness increases, something else begins to happen. Along with the pull toward connection, there is also a growing sense of discomfort. One part of them is drawn in, but another part is becoming alert. It starts to sense possible threats, not just of being hurt, but of losing control, of becoming dependent, or of being expected to stay in that level of closeness. The closer they get, the stronger that inner alarm becomes, and so they begin to pull away again. Sometimes it is small and subtle, like slower replies or less energy in conversation. Other times it is more clear and sudden, but the outcome is the same. Distance returns.
In that distance, they find balance again. They return to themselves, and the pressure begins to ease. But now, something new starts building on both sides. For the avoidant, the space brings back their sense of safety, and with it, their desire slowly starts to grow again. For the partner, the sudden withdrawal creates confusion and often anxiety. They start to question what changed, what they did, and what the connection really meant. And in that gap, the memory of the intense moments becomes even stronger. The absence makes those moments feel even more important and meaningful. So when the avoidant comes back, and they often do, the reconnection feels even more powerful than before. There is relief, there is excitement, and a sense that things are back again. And once again, that energy often moves into physical closeness, because it is the fastest way to remove the distance without dealing with the emotional gap that caused it.
This is why the pattern can feel addictive. You are not only responding to the person, you are responding to the cycle itself. The shifts between distance and closeness create emotional highs that can feel like deep passion. But this is not stability. It is movement between extremes. And most people are not ready for that because what they are looking for is something steady. They want a connection that grows over time in a consistent way. But in this pattern, closeness does not grow in a straight line. It appears, fades, and then returns again. Without awareness, this creates a loop where one person keeps seeking clarity and the other keeps seeking space. The real risk is in how the experience is understood. It is often called chemistry when it is actually contrast, or depth when it is intensity shaped by absence. The body feels the emotional high and does not always recognize the difference. But real connection is not defined by how strong things feel in certain moments.
It is defined by what stays steady, even when those moments are not there. If closeness only appears after distance, and intensity only shows up after withdrawal, then what is happening is not balance. It is a repeating cycle. And when you look deeper into that cycle, you start to understand something that can easily be misunderstood when you only focus on surface behavior. What looks like control or strong intensity in an avoidance expression is not always about power over someone else. It is often about protecting themselves. At the center of this pattern is a specific kind of fear. It is not just the fear of being hurt or rejected, but the fear of being emotionally overwhelmed to the point of losing their sense of self. For them, closeness can feel like a risk to their independence and identity. This fear does not disappear when connection becomes physical. It simply changes its form and shows up in a different way.
So they find ways to stay engaged while still keeping a sense of control. One of the main ways they do this is by shaping the pace and flow of the interaction. This is not always obvious. It can be subtle. They may guide the rhythm, decide when things deepen, and when they slow down or stop. This is not always a conscious choice. It is often automatic. It helps them stay connected without feeling overwhelmed. Control, in this situation, becomes a way to stay balanced. It allows them to be present while still protecting themselves from going too far emotionally. By guiding the experience, they can take part in it without losing themselves. By setting limits, they can feel intensity without crossing into a level of vulnerability that feels too much. It allows them to stay near closeness without fully stepping into it. To the other person, this can feel very strong and appealing. There is a sense of direction and certainty. It can feel like being led into something meaningful and focused.
But at the same time, there can be a feeling that something is being held back, something that is not fully shared. This creates a kind of inner conflict. One part of the partner is drawn to the intensity and clarity of the moment. Another part senses that the openness is not equal, that while the physical experience feels shared, the emotional exposure is not the same on both sides. If this difference is not understood, it can slowly change the dynamic. The partner may begin to move closer, trying to match the depth they believe they have already experienced. They try to bring that same openness into other parts of the connection. But the avoidant senses that shift and feels the pressure building again. In response, they either hold on more tightly to control or pull away completely. What once looked like simple passion begins to show its deeper structure. It becomes clear that the intensity exists within limits that protect the avoidant from emotional overwhelm.
This does not mean the experience is not real. The presence is real, but it is shaped by the need to maintain strong boundaries at all times. And this shaping is what makes it difficult for many people to fully relax into the connection, even when it feels powerful. Because true intimacy is not about how deeply you can feel in one moment. It is about how safe it feels to exist together without needing to control the experience. When control becomes the main condition for connection, what remains is not full openness. It becomes a form of strategy, even if it is not planned. And this is where the misunderstanding reaches its highest point. because by now the experience has created a very strong belief in the mind of the partner. The intensity has been felt, the presence has been clear, and the moments have carried a kind of emotional energy that feels too strong to ignore. So the natural conclusion becomes that it must mean something deeper and lasting.
But that assumption is exactly where things begin to fall apart, because it places meaning on moments that were never designed to carry that kind of continuity. Because most people are naturally wired to read intensity as depth. When something feels strong, immersive, and almost overwhelming, we quickly give it meaning. We believe it reflects emotional investment, that it signals care, attachment, or even love. And in many situations, that belief works, because in healthier and more secure dynamics, emotional and physical closeness tend to move together. They support and strengthen each other over time. But with an avoidant, that alignment is often broken. What you are experiencing in those intense moments is not always a clear window into their emotional world. It is more like a release point, a way for built-up energy to come out under certain conditions. At that point, they begin to step back.
And now you are left holding two very different realities at the same time. One is what you felt, something intense and meaningful that seemed undeniable. The other is what you are receiving afterward, which may feel distant, unclear, or emotionally unavailable. The mind naturally tries to make sense of this difference. It wants a clear reason, a cause and effect that fits together. But the truth is, the intensity was never a promise. It was simply an experience. And once you begin to see that difference clearly, something inside you starts to shift in how you understand it. To stay balanced, you have to accept that intensity can be real without being reliable, and that connection can exist without always being available. Most people struggle with this, so they begin to adjust in ways that slowly pull them away from themselves, overthinking, chasing clarity, or protecting themselves from emotional swings.
This often leads to accepting less than what they truly need, because the focus shifts to making the connection work instead of questioning if it is right for them. In the end, the challenge is not the intensity itself, but the inconsistency behind it. Real connection is not built on how strong a moment feels, but on how steady and supportive it remains over time. And recognizing that difference allows you to choose what is real, instead of what only feels powerful for a short time. In the end, the truth becomes simple, even if it took a long time to see it clearly. What you felt was real, but it was not a promise. It was a moment that carried intensity, not stability. And once you understand that, you stop chasing meaning where there was only experience. You stop trying to turn short bursts of closeness into something that can hold you over time.
Because real connection is not defined by how powerful it feels at its peak, but by how steady it remains when those peaks are gone. So the real shift is not in changing the other person, but in changing what you measure. You stop asking how deep it felt, and start asking how consistent it is. You stop holding on to moments and start looking at patterns. And most importantly, you return to yourself, to your own needs, your own sense of balance, your own clarity, because a connection that requires you to lose that is not something that can truly support you. And when you see that without confusion, you no longer feel pulled by intensity alone. You choose what is steady, what is real, and what can actually last.